It was April 13th, 2003. A couple was walking their dog in a marshy area of the San Francisco Bay. Their Sunday couldn't have been any more calming up until they stumbled upon something incredibly disturbing. Their dog caught a scent and dragged them slightly off their path. But they couldn't have ever expected what they saw next. They were pulled in the direction of a decomposing body, one of a small baby with signs of strangulation. But before saying anything else, I must warn you about the contents of this video. I will be talking about some incredibly gruesome acts, so if you're uncomfortable with themes of violence or mutilation, I strongly suggest clicking away from this video. It was 1994, 9 years before the body was found. Scott Peterson was an employee at a restaurant on Morro Bay called the Pacific Cafe. A frequent guest at this cafe was Lacey Rocha, who would often visit a co-worker of Peterson's. One fateful day, the two started talking for the first time and seemed to get along very well, very quickly. During this meeting, Lacey ended up giving her number to Peterson, and later that day, she told her mother that she was certain Peterson was the one she would eventually marry. Shortly after meeting for the first time, they started dating. It wasn't long before they fell in love with one another and seemed to have formed a genuine connection. They continued this way for a while both of them were in university, until eventually, 2 years after their first encounter, the two moved in together. Quickly following moving in 1997, they got married. Early in their marriage, Peterson opened a sports bar in San Luis called The Shack. While their families didn't think this was a great investment of the money they had, the two poured a lot of time into this bar, and it seemed like something that deepened the connection that they had further. They operated The Shack for several years until finally selling it in order to move closer to Lacey's family in Modesto, California in 2001. Peterson started working on a salary plus commission basis as a salesperson for irrigation systems and fertilizers. He was able to take home a sizable salary worth no less than $5,000 a month. Lacey worked as a part-time teacher, but cared much more for Peterson and knew he was bringing in enough money for the both of them. Therefore, she was a little more focused on being the perfect housewife for her husband. With his salary, they were able to live fairly well, and she was able to focus on what she liked to do the most, which was cooking and entertaining. 1 year after the move, she had gotten pregnant with her first child. They and their families were happy and ready to provide a warm and welcoming home to their new baby boy. It seemed that the more time that passed, the closer these two got, and Lacey would often spout about how much she loved Peterson to her family. But shortly after hearing of the pregnancy, and a little closer to Christmas that year, Peterson began visiting a massage therapist named Amber Faye. They began a romantic relationship behind Lacey's back after he told her that he was single. As Christmas approached in late December of 2002, Peterson and Lacey visited Peterson's parents. Several days later, on December 23rd, Lacey's sister spoke to them at a hair appointment they scheduled with her, and later that night, Lacey's mother ended up being the last to speak with them before a tragedy would happen that would devastate both Lacey and Peterson families. The next day, Peterson went fishing at 9:30 a.m. Peterson said that Lacey was expecting to watch some cooking shows before taking their dog on a walk later that day. At 2 separate points during the day, neighbors found their golden retriever, Mackenzie, walking around the neighborhood alone, and returned the golden back to their yard. When Peterson got home, Mackenzie was safely in their backyard. However, Lacey wasn't home. After several hours, he reported her missing. He called the police when she hadn't returned by around 5:20 p.m. At around 6 p.m., he also called her mother and father. Lacey's parents decided to phone the police that night as well. When she was missing on Christmas Day, the case went viral, grabbing the interest of national headlines. This was the beginning of the disappearance of an 8-month pregnant woman. Modesto police lead detectives John Bueller and Alan Braccini took note of several odd things when visiting the Peterson household. Despite initial evidence supporting the idea that Lacey had gone on a walk with their dog before mysteriously vanishing, Lacey's keys, wallet, and purse were in the closet. These are things that she would very infrequently leave the house without, potentially indicating that she didn't leave of her own volition. The dining room table was meticulously set up for dinner, and a phone book on the kitchen table was open to a full-page ad for a defense lawyer. Skepticism began arising around Peterson, especially when they noticed that he seemed deadly calm and didn't ask many of the expected questions of somebody who recently found their pregnant wife to be missing. Additionally, when questioned further, Peterson had several inconsistencies with his story, some being as large as changing the story for his entire day of Lacey's disappearance. Despite this, his in-laws and Lacey's parents vouched for him. They defended him and suggested Lacey and Peterson were the ideal couple. On January 17th, Peterson's affair with Amber was brought to light, but, in retrospect, what Amber told the police was extremely haunting. She told them exactly what he told her when suggesting he was single earlier in their romantic relationship. Amber relayed, "He said he lost his wife, and this would be the first holiday without his wife. While this likely could indicate he already had plans to kill his wife, it was still unclear if this was an admission of intent to murder." But Lacey wasn't just murdered, she was mutilated. Lacey's parents withdrew support for Peterson on January 24th, 2003. It was April 13th, during that same year. A couple was out walking their dog in a marshy area of the San Francisco Bay. Their Sunday couldn't have been any more relaxing, at least until their dog dragged them a little off the path. It was in the direction of a decomposing fetus. The fetus had nearly 2 loops of nylon around its neck. This was the unborn baby of Peterson and Lacey, taken directly from her dismembered corpse. 1 mile away and 1 day later, a civilian stumbled upon Lacey's body, a part of her body at least. It was only her torso. Her head, legs, arms, and most internal organs were not found until later, if found at all. Due to the decomposition of the body, as well as the missing body parts, she was hardly recognizable as human. It was only because of a successful DNA test that they were able to identify the body as Lacey's. To this day, it is unclear what the cause of death was and if Lacey was still alive when she was dismembered. Peterson began the trial of the murder of Lacey on June 1st, 2004, and on November 12th of that year, Peterson was convicted and sentenced to death by lethal injection. They deemed him guilty on 2 accounts of murder, 1 for the baby and 1 for Lacey. Many members of the jury later spoke to Peterson's total lack of emotion following Lacey's disappearance as particularly horrifying. Later, in 2020, he was taken off death row due to several complications with his judge and jurors. His sentence was replaced with life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Peterson and Lacey's family will always be affected by what Peterson did, and Lacey's whole body was never found. If you want more information generally or on the specifics of this case, there are a few books in the description that give more information on various areas. If you want more dark and disturbing stories or unsolved mysteries, consider subscribing and ringing the bell, because I tell them several times a week.